The room fell silent, and though Tom rolled his eyes, others nodded in agreement. Margaret's confidence was growing, and with it, her ability to stand up for what she now believed. The town's efforts to foster inclusivity culminated in a groundbreaking event, the unveiling of a new community center dedicated to unity and education. The center offered free classes on topics like history, cultural awareness, and conflict resolution. James was asked to cut the ribbon at the opening ceremony. He stood on the stage, feeling a mix of pride and humility. "This isn't about me," he told the crowd. "It's about all of us. It's about building a community where everyone feels safe, valued, and respected." The applause was thunderous, and as James stepped down, he saw Margaret in the audience, clapping with tears in her eyes. Margaret didn't stop at public apologies or activism. She began looking inward, examining her biases and tracing them back to their roots. She realized that her upbringing in a homogeneous, insular community had shaped her worldview. To challenge herself, Margaret started traveling to nearby cities, attending cultural events, and meeting people from diverse backgrounds. She began volunteering at a shelter for immigrants, listening to their stories and gaining a deeper understanding of their struggles. One day, as she helped a young mother fill out paperwork, the woman thanked her with a warm smile. "You've been so kind," she said. Margaret smiled back, realizing that she was no longer the person she had been a year ago. Months later, James and Margaret found themselves seated next to each other at a town council meeting. The topic was education reform, and both had come to support adding more inclusive materials to the school curriculum. During a break, Margaret turned to James. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" he asked, genuinely surprised. "For not giving up on this town," she replied. "For not giving up on me." James paused, then nodded. "It's not about giving up or staying," he said. "It's about moving forward, and it looks like you're doing that." They shared a brief smile, a moment of understanding that felt like the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. James's Strong Roots mentorship program was piloted in 3 nearby towns with high rates of youth unemployment and school dropout. Each new location adapted the program to its unique needs while maintaining the core principles James had established: resilience, leadership, and community engagement. A key feature was the Navigator series, a set of workshops where participants heard from individuals who had overcome adversity in various fields: business, sports, arts, and public service. James personally recruited speakers, ensuring the stories were as diverse and inspiring as the young people they aimed to reach. One notable success story was a teenager named Malik, who had been on the brink of expulsion before joining Strong Roots. Through mentorship, Malik discovered a passion for mechanics and eventually earned a scholarship to a vocational school. At an event celebrating the program's success, Malik gave a heartfelt speech. "Before this program, I didn't think people like me had a chance. Now, I know I can build a future. Thank you, Mr. Bryant, for believing in us." James, moved to tears, realized that his efforts were shaping not just individual lives, but the community's future. Margaret's Bridges, Not Walls workshops also expanded, becoming a cornerstone of diversity and inclusion training for schools, businesses, and civic organizations. One day, a major university invited Margaret to deliver a keynote speech at its annual Diversity Summit. The topic: transforming regret into action. She stood before an audience of hundreds, sharing her journey from ignorance to advocacy. During the Q&A, a young professor asked, "What do you say to people who feel overwhelmed by the idea of change?" Margaret responded thoughtfully, "Change doesn't happen all at once. It starts with small, deliberate steps, listening, learning, and acknowledging where we've fallen short. It's not about being perfect. It's about being better than we were yesterday." Her words resonated deeply, earning her a standing ovation. Recognizing their complementary strengths, James and Margaret began working together on larger initiatives. They co-founded an organization called Pathways Forward, aimed at creating systemic change through education, mentorship, and policy advocacy. One of their first projects was lobbying for statewide reforms in school curriculums. Their goal was to ensure history classes included the contributions and struggles of underrepresented groups. James spoke at the state legislature, sharing how his own Ducation had overlooked critical parts of history. It's not about rewriting history, he said. It's about telling the whole story. The initiative gained bipartisan support and led to the implementation of the Inclusive Education Act, which became a model for other states. Despite their busy schedules, James and Margaret took time to reflect on how far they'd come. One evening, after a town hall meeting, Margaret invited James for coffee at a local diner. As they sipped their drinks, she said, "Do you ever think about how this all started? How something so terrible led to this?" James chuckled. "Every day. Life's funny that way. But it's not just about what happened, it's about what we did with it." Margaret nodded. "I used to think change was something big and scary. Now I know it's just a lot of small decisions adding up." The impact of their work began to show in measurable ways. Increased civic engagement. Voter turnout in their town doubled during local elections, with more diverse candidates running for office. Educational improvements. Schools reported higher levels of student engagement and fewer incidents of bullying after adopting inclusive curriculums. Economic growth. Businesses in the town began prioritizing diversity in hiring, leading to a more inclusive workplace culture. As James and Margaret approached their later years, they reflected on the legacy they were leaving behind. Though neither sought recognition, their efforts were honored in a special ceremony at the state capitol. The governor presented them with the Spirit of Unity Award, praising their work as a testament to the power of reconciliation and the enduring strength of community. In his acceptance speech, James said, "This work isn't just about the past, it's about the future. It's about the kind of world we want to leave for our children and grandchildren," Margaret added, "and it's about proving that even when we make mistakes, we can choose to grow, to learn, and to make amends." Years later, on a crisp autumn day, James and Margaret stood together at the dedication of a new wing of the community center. The plaque read, "In honor of James Bryant and Margaret Wilson, whose journey reminds us that change begins with courage, compassion, and understanding." James, now in his 70s, felt a sense of pride as he looked around at the gathering. Children laughed on the playground, young leaders shared ideas in the mentoring rooms, and people of all ages and backgrounds came together in the space they had helped create. Margaret, standing beside him, smiled. "I never would have imagined my name on a plaque like this," she said softly. James chuckled. "Life's full of surprises. Who would have thought a can of paint would lead to all this?" They both laughed. The memory of that chaotic day, a distant but meaningful milestone. As the ceremony ended, James and Margaret walked out into the garden, where a new tree had been planted. It was an oak, chosen for its symbolism of strength and endurance. Margaret touched one of its young branches. "Do you think it'll grow strong?" James nodded. "With the right care, it will. Just like everything else." They stood quietly for a moment, watching the sunlight filter through the leaves, knowing that the seeds they had planted both in their town and in each other would continue to grow for generations to come.